Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Sorry. I almost said Seattle Seahawks. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, and here to talk Seahawks football as well as the NFC overall. We're going to rank the top 10 teams in the NFC as we see it currently in the offseason here, and it'll be a fun conversation, especially where Seattle fits into this into the NFC rankings. I think overall the big observation, Keith, for me is that this is a very weak conference overall.
Oh, it's an extremely weak conference. There's like 6 good teams, and that's it.
Yeah, and then the AFC, those 6 teams, like 2 or 3 of them would be in the top 7. Playoff teams, because the AFC is crazy. I mean, the way I looked at it, I think Seattle, or excuse me, in the NFC, I think the NFC overall in the NFL occupies maybe the top 5 teams in the top 15 overall, and the rest are the AFC teams. It's just it's really lopsided right now. It's interesting. Okay, let's get this thing started. We'll go in reverse order. So the 10th best team, as we see it, for me, I had the Washington Commanders at 10 overall. Now, I will say this: it was really difficult to pick the top, the bottom, I should say, 2 or 3 teams here, because they're all similar to me, and they're not playoff teams, in my estimation. Now, one can sneak in there because of the diminished quality of the NFC overall. So one of these teams could kind of bounce up and surprise. But overall, when you compare them to the AFC, you could have 12 teams out of the AFC in the playoffs if they were NFC teams. I mean, it'd be crazy. But it's fairly lopsided. But I like Washington. I think they're pretty well coached. They signed Jacoby Brissett to come in and kind of placehold, if you will, at the quarterback position. I think that they have a decent defense. I think it's a borderline top 10 defense. And that's why they made my list, because the offense really doesn't do it for me. I thought they did address the weakest position that they had on their team on the offensive line by signing Andrew Wiley at tackle and Nick Gates to at guard, and then they went in the draft and also added Ricky Stromberg at center, has a chance to start. Braden Daniels, offensive lineman from Utah, an athletic guy, possibly has a chance to start for them. So it's going to be, they've addressed the issue that they had, but it's going to take some time for them to come together.
Yeah. You're right. The biggest thing is I actually like their roster. I think overall they've got a decent roster. But you mentioned Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. I don't actually think he starts. I think Sam Howell, it's his job to lose.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's not a great position group. But there's a reason why they, tried the Carson Wentz experiment a year ago, which of course failed. But they're just in one of those spots where they need a quarterback. Now, do they tank in a way to get them a quarterback? Because this next quarterback class is really nice. I don't think they will, but they probably should, because the rest of the roster is ready to win, because the quarterback's just not. But overall, yeah. I think they have a good enough roster. This, to me, if they get anything out of the quarterback, I think this is a playoff team.
I think they have some weakness in the back end on the defense as well. I mentioned that they were a almost top 10 defense. One of the weaknesses is at corner. They'll probably end up having 2 rookies Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State, 16th overall pick, extremely undersized.
Mm.
Start at one spot, and then the safety Jartavius Martin I liked in this draft ended up not testing very well, so he dropped a little bit. 97th pick overall. I think he comes in and starts right away as well. That makes them vulnerable and young in that back end for them. But overall, they're decent. I don't want to spend too much time talking about them. This is kind of an 8 win team
Yeah.
ish.
So
Okay.
speaking of 8-win teams, my number 10 is New Orleans. Yeah, they get Derek Carr. That's a big upgrade for them at quarterback. Um, but the team is getting old. It's kind of continues to fall overall as a quality of a roster, and I have a hard time seeing them, like get back to the Drew Brees days. Um, but what's been holding them back the last couple of years has, for the most part, been quarterback play, and so they went and got Derek Carr,
Hmm.
which is a good move for them. I just
Hmm.
don't know if the rest of the roster is what it used to be, and I see this as like an 8-win team, and 8 wins is good enough to make top 10 um, in the NFC.
Yeah.
So they're my number 10.
Yeah, Derek Carr is interesting in this offense. Head coach Dennis Allen, I think is going to give them an opportunity to stay in games on the defensive side of the ball. They drafted Brian Breesy, I think an underrated defensive tackle, but has some room to grow this year. Isaiah Foskey, the edge, in a 4-3 defense. He's a really nice, stout edge, defending the run kind of a player out of Notre Dame. Kendre Miller, one of my favorite running backs out of this draft in the 4th round. I think is a good signing. They also had Jamal Williams in free agency from Detroit. So they rounded out the roster where I think that they needed to. It's a weak division. I think Tampa Bay is diminishing. Atlanta is not yet a formidable team, although some out there believe that they have a chance, but only because the NFC is so weak and the division's really weak. And then you've got New Orleans. I just think that they've got the I've got I've got New Orleans as my number 8 team, but I don't really like them there. I don't know that they necessarily are that team, but we'll see. Derek Carr, I think they go as far as Derek Carr, and it's
Yeah.
an upgrade over Winston for sure.
Hmm.
And I think that Derek Carr's probably a +2 win quarterback for them based on where they're at. And they were kind of a middling team last year. You could say they finished anywhere from top rankings anywhere from 15 to 20, and they're probably right in that bucket right now, which puts them as the 8th best team in the NFC and on the fringe of being in the playoffs. And I just think that in the AFC they wouldn't even be in the conversation.
Oh yeah, they're not even close. But in the
Okay.
NFC, right? It's the NFC.
So my next team to talk about is my number 9 overall club in Carolina, and that might surprise some.
Also my number 9 overall.
And that might surprise some people because they ended up with the first pick in the draft. They had a 7-10 record last year, not horrible. That was greatly improved. They went out and got an upgrade at coach Frank Wright over Matt Rule. I think
Mhm.
and they've got a great coaching staff overall. Dom Capers is there, I believe, and others. I mentioned they signed Bryce Young or drafted him. I think they upgraded at running back with Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen, and DJ Shark come in. Thielen was in Minnesota. Shark was in Detroit, I believe. Von Bell upgrades their safety place. They had a decent draft. In addition to Young, they drafted Jonathan Mingo, 39th overall. I think he's going to be one of the best wide receivers out of this draft when it's all said and done. DJ Johnson. I thought they overdrafted him out of Oregon to play the edge for them.
Oh yeah,
But
I would agree with that.
overall though, this is a team on the rise. I just don't know how far that is, and I've got them in this conversation only because again the NFC is weak, and it's going to go as far as Bryce Young takes them.
Yeah, I actually kind of like the way that they're building the roster. They're not going out and signing, the highest priced guys. because they know that they're not, they're not contenders for a Super Bowl right now. They draft quarterback number one overall, gave him a good um, receiving option in Mingo with their second pick, got him a guard in Chandler Zavala with their
Mhm.
fourth pick. And, just, and then you look at what they did kind of in free agency where they gave him another weapon in Adam Thielen, and they're kind of building around um, their their quarterback, but not in a, "Oh, we're gonna go spend a pile of money" way. More just like keep, taking it, kinda slow playing it, and allowing a young core to form.
Mhm.
And, so it ends up being a good way to do it. I don't think they're ready to make a huge jump, but I also have them at 9. I think they're gonna be an interesting team.
Yeah.
It is weird that they traded DJ Moore, though, a 26-year-old, like, really good receiver. Like, that's a hard one for me to swallow given he's young enough that when you're good, he would still be good. Um, but I think they replaced him with Mingo. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where the conversation starts to get a little bit more interesting. We're talking about the playoff level teams potentially. I've got the New York Giants at number 7 for me. Um, I think that they signed a good tight end in Darrell Waller. Saquon Barkley is still there with the franchise tag. Daniel Jones apparently is their quarterback that they like. They had a decent draft. Deontay Banks at corner was a good draft pick for them at 24 overall. You like John Michael Schmidt, their center pick at 57 overall. I think is a great value. And he was expected
Mhm.
to go a little higher than that. Jalen Hyatt, wide receiver out of Tennessee. Eric Gray, I think is an underrated running back for them. And they signed Bobby Okereke, I think is how you pronounce that, the linebacker, paid him top linebacker dollars to come in and hold that thing down. Ashawn Robinson to be defensive tackle for them. I think they've improved a little bit and gave Brian DeBall some a chance to be real competitive. And I think that they are. I mean, they were a 9-win team last year and really kind of came up and surprised some teams. They have a chance, I think, to get to 10 or 11 wins this year.
They did lose, what their one of their best defensive players, and that would be Julian Love, who signed with Seattle. Um,
True.
so there's that. No, to me, this is actually a pretty good roster. This is a team that can play. It all comes down with them. Can they get much out of their quarterback position? They just gave, Danny Dimes a um a massive $40 million a year contract, which I
Oh,
think is
yeah.
absurd.
I do too.
Uh, but for them, it was like, well, we either pay him or we go back to the well and start over. And we think the rest of the roster is in pretty good shape. So they chose to pay him and see if they
They were,
can
yeah,
push this along.
they really didn't have much of a choice there. It was either
No.
that or go out and break the bank for somebody else, and they'd rather just go do it with their young guy that they've got in their
Hmm.
system that they didn't really not like. They just, I think they needed to surround him with a few more things. And
Yep. When
yeah,
they did a little bit, getting guys like Darren Waller
yes,
at tight end will definitely help. Paris Campbell, the wide
hmm
receiver will help. And
hmm
then, yeah, and then with
and
the
Jalen
way
Hyatt in the draft.
the way they drafted and Eric Gray at running back too. Um, you know, they tried to put more talent around their quarterback and we'll see what happens. I'm not convinced. But you know what? Go prove me wrong, kid. I've actually got them
Yeah.
higher.
Oh,
I've got them if I do my counting here at 6.
okay. Yeah, I had them at
Um
7. So
So,
again, interchangeable teams here. Who'd you have at 7?
Washington.
Okay. So we've already talked about those guys.
Yep.
What's your next team that we haven't mentioned yet?
Minnesota, which
Yeah, me
actually
too.
Washington was my 8. Minnesota is my 7.
Minnesota's my
Um,
6. So go ahead.
yeah. So Minnesota, coming off a year in which they won a ton of games, but I think everyone outside of, Minnesota recognized that they were kind of a paper tiger. The defense wasn't good. They Their offense was okay. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't a world beater. And then they lost a bunch
They
of
can score
talent.
points. They scored points though.
They did, but they also played a really, really weak schedule. Um,
Their defense gave up just as many points as their offense scored though, and they had a great offense. But their
yeah.
defense was 26th overall. They went out though. I really like this signing, and it isn't a player; it's a coach, Brian Flores, as defensive
Mhm.
coordinator. I thought was a really nice signing for them because they really did need to kind of address that. And I think he's going to make them better. This is an interesting team for me. It's a team that I don't really pay too much attention to. You mentioned the paper tiger thing last year. Totally true. You just kind of knew that they were going to be one and done in the playoffs. And they were. And I think that, um, it's interesting. I like the team. They're just one of those teams that you just never really think about. But I think with the diminishing Green Bay Packers. That
Mhm.
gives them an opportunity to maybe be, first or second in that division. Detroit has a ways to go. We can talk about them in a second, I believe. But um, Minnesota's right there, and um, in fact, probably favored in the division, to be completely honest. But you don't think of them that way.
Yeah, they also lost, a lot of talent. I mean, Adam Thielen went to the Panthers. They traded away Zadarius Smith,
Yeah,
the pass rusher. Dalvin Cook is, um, not
yeah,
re-signed. He's out there in free agency. It doesn't look like he's coming back. Dalvin Tomlinson
that
on
was
the
the big one.
defensive line,
That's the big
um,
one.
that's a big loss. Eric Kendricks at linebacker,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Patrick Peterson at, corner. So
mm-hmm.
they've lost some guys, and they need to find ways to replace some of that production. I mean, you're replacing, Patrick Peterson with Byron Murphy. I don't know, that's not an upgrade.
Yeah, well,
Um
yeah, you're
But
yes,
he is younger and cheaper, and so at
yes.
that point you go, "Yeah, that was a good move." But overall, um, and then, back to the draft, like Jordan Addison, the first round pick,
I
that's a
like that
nice
pick.
addition. Um, Blackman, the cornerback out of USC, and Ward, the cornerback out of LSU. They'll get a lot of, work out of both of them.
Yep.
Um, I mean, overall, like, I think this is a team that did a lot of the lateral movement. They got cheaper in some areas, which they needed to do, but I don't know they improved, overall. And so, they're a playoff team in the NFC. Like you said, they're probably gonna win this division. I don't think so. I think they're gonna end up second in the division because they're gonna come
Wow.
their record is gonna come back down to earth simply because they play a tougher schedule this year. And I
Wow.
think that, yeah, but they're a playoff team. They're easily a, wild card team in the NFC.
So they finished 13-4 last year. I mean, and
Mhm.
nobody really thinks about them as being a contender for the Super Bowl or anything like that. It's kind of crazy. Okay, so is the next team the team that you want to talk about that's going to win this division?
Well, the next team that I've got, is the Giants, which we've already talked about.
Okay. Okay.
And then which is my 6th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in 6, that's where you have Minnesota?
Yes. And then I've got
Okay,
Detroit at 5.
I've got Detroit at 5.
Yeah. Why do you have Detroit at 5, Keith?
I have Detroit at 5 because they appeared to turn a corner last year. They, had an awful, awful defense, but their, offense could score with anybody. And now they've had a chance to address some of those deficiencies on defense. I think that they're the best team in their division. I love their coach. I think he is a fantastic coach, who gets a lot out of his team. And then, they went and got guys like Jack Campbell in the draft, who is like kind of that old school, like punishing guy up
Mm.
front, middle linebacker. And Brian Branch at safety slash cornerback in the second round was a great pick.
Hmm.
Um, Broderick Martin in round 3 on the defensive end. Like they did a really good job with in the draft of addressing some of their needs. And they in free agency they didn't really lose
I
much in
bet they,
terms of the
yeah,
way of starters. Um, but they had some good signings in there. I like Glasgow, the right guard that they signed. I think that's going to be an improvement. Marvin Jones, Emmanuel Mosley, Cameron Sutton, right?
Cameron
And
Sutton's going to start for them.
yeah, Emmanuel Mosby might, at least
Yeah.
maybe in the beginning. Um, they they added a lot to the defense. They didn't subtract on offense. Um,
They
I think.
lost Jamal Williams, but they added David Montgomery, underrated running back, going to
Mhm.
be a physical runner for them. Jamal Williams was more of a slasher. This guy, David Montgomery, is going to be amazing. But then they did get a slasher in the draft, and Jamar Gibbs, 12th overall pick in the draft, first running back taken.
Well, it's because
Um,
they traded DeAndre. Yeah, they traded DeAndre Swift, um, and
yes,
then basically instantly drafted his replacement after that in Gibbs, which I thought that was kind of a weird move, but um, I was really trying to wrap my brain around it, and it
they,
kind of reminded me of the Colts early in the Peyton Manning days when they traded. Um, oh my God, I'm in the mid sentence and I'll lose the name. But they traded away a Hall of Famer and drafted Edgerrin
Edgerrin
James.
James. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of the same lateral move, but it's a matter of resetting the clock in terms of contracts. And
That, and I think they wanted the identity of their coach. I mean, Swift didn't get along with Dan Campbell. That part is well known,
that's, yeah,
and they just went in a different direction. Jamal Williams as well, and they got a workhorse and David Montgomery, who's going to punish people in that style, and Jamar Gibbs is going to give them guys that can get to the edge and home run ability and catch the ball out of the backfield,
catch
which
the
is
ball out of
what
the
they want to
backfield.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. And Sam
Marshall,
Laporta, the underrated
Marshall
tight
Falk,
end,
that was the guy that
Marshall Falk.
I was thinking of. And part of the reason I thought about that is because Gibbs is very much Marshall Falk style guy.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I like their draft. They got Hendon Hooker as well, one of my favorite players in the draft, albeit older, but a guy that potentially take over for Jared Goff next year. So that's interesting. I like them. I had them fifth here as well for the same reason. I think they're the best team in the division, even though Minnesota, record wise, regular season wise, they're built to win in the regular season. And they've got a slightly better defense this year and a better coach. We'll see. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting races in the NFC is that division and who gets that division crown. I think both teams go to the playoffs, though.
Yeah. So number 4, who do you got?
I have the Dallas Cowboys. Um,
I have them at 3.
yeah, I know, and I know who you probably have at 4. It's very close to home, and I
Yes.
did this on purpose. I put Dallas at 4, and I put Seattle at 3 because I think by the end of the year, that's exactly how they finish. Might be right
Mm.
now. Dallas might have but blah, 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 blah. Show me when Dallas has lived up to their preseason ranking in the last 10 years. They just
Well,
haven't.
in the
And,
last 20 years, no, they
and,
haven't.
and I just think that it's the same. It's on repeat. I don't know until they show me different. I just really love Seattle's upside, and I'm trying not to be a homer on this particular situation, but it's hard not to, because I really do believe Seattle is the third best team in the NFC right now.
Well, I look um at Dallas because that's where we're at on your number 4.
Hmm.
Um, and I like the addition of Brandon Cooks at wide receiver to give them someone who can stretch the field a bit. I like the addition of um, Stephen Gilmore at cornerback, who will come in and start. Um, and so that really is upgrading two of the positions where they really needed to upgrade. And then you come in and you get one of the most athletic defensive linemen we've seen in a long time in Mozzie Smith to be their nose tackle. Um, you
Hmm.
know, DeMarvion Overshone at
Hmm.
linebacker. I like what they've done here. I think that they've solidified a roster that was already good. And that's why I have them at third instead of at fourth. Um,
I just, the reason that I dropped them a little bit, especially in this ranking, was that I did like their draft, but they did lose Connor McGovern at guard. They
mhm,
lost their tight end, Dalton Schultz. They lost linebacker Luke Gifford, who gave them a lot of snaps. Wide receiver Noah Brown, fourth wide receiver Carlos Watkins, defensive end. Okay, but they didn't sign really anybody of note. You mentioned the trade of Stephon Gilmore, but
mhm.
that's really it as far as adding any veteran presence to that team. Ezekiel Elliott, you know, is gone. Mozzie Smith, Shoemaker, Overshone, Fiocco at the edge, but he played for San Jose State. He's probably not going to have an impact. Everyone else beyond that, maybe Deuce Vaughn gets some playing time, who they drafted in the 6th round. Mozzie Smith is the big name there. I just think that they lost a little bit on their overall depth and quality of roster, and I mean, that's not going to mean much in the NFC. But when you take a look at Seattle, my next team at number 3 overall, Seattle did more. If you really take a look at the roster, albeit young and somewhat unproven, so is Dallas's roster in some key spots. And I think if you put Dak Prescott on the same level as Smith, Geno Smith as a quarterback, being able to move the ball and all that kind of stuff, all things being equal, I tip it over to Seattle. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I just look at um, so much of it is in Seattle is first and second year players.
Yes,
And I
it's true.
they got Bobby Wagner back to give them some leadership, which they really, really needed. Um, but he's, at the end of his career. He's an older guy and who's noticeably slower. And so we'll see what happens with that because he's got a chance to come in and really solidify things. But that involves the people up front doing significantly better than they did last year at keeping him clean. And we'll see what happens with that because they don't have an experienced nose tackle on the roster. So, um,
I agree with what you just said, but you immediately went to the defense
of
to
course, I went to the defense
point out the weakness in this team.
because the
But it's
offense is
all about
freaking
the
amazing.
offense. It's all
The
about the offense,
the
Keith.
offense is probably the best in the NFL.
And enough, I think, to really carry this team even over a mediocre defense. And I don't think the defense is going to be mediocre, at least by the end of the year. Maybe
Yeah,
in September when they haven't congealed yet properly, kind of come
congealed.
together.
Nice word. I like that.
but but you
Congealed.
had Draymond Jones in there. You've got some young guys, going to have an impact, and Cameron Young and Derek Hall. You've got the best corner drafted in the draft, and Devon Witherspoon is not going to need to have too many adjustments coming into the NFL. He's going to be NFL ready. You've got Jackson Smith and Jigba going to be a slot. They're not going to ask him to do too much, but he's going to take advantage of some double teams that are going to be on DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And I think he's going to have a stellar season there in the slot as long as he builds rapport with Geno Smith. Geno Smith's coming back. You mentioned, we've got Ken Walker. We drafted Zach Charbonnet. That backup is perfect in the NFL. A second starting running back level starter to come in. He can play right away and take snaps. There's not a lot of schooling that needs to happen there. He just has natural instincts that will get him by. I think the real question is, can Seattle's offensive line play at least as good, and if not better than last year? And if they do, this offense is nearly unstoppable.
Yeah, this offense, I guess, I think it's the best offense in the NFL at the moment. At least it's the best offense in the NFC. We'll go with that. It's just explosive in every level, and can put up points with anybody. Question is, can they get enough stops? I think they can, and that's why. I mean, they're a top 4 team in my mind in the NFC, or top 3 in yours, better than, um division winners by other, in other divisions. It's a
And I think
quality roster.
it's remarkable. It's remarkable that we're having this conversation right now. If
Oh,
we were
yeah.
sitting here last year at this time, there is
Oh,
absolutely no way we could have forecasted that we'd be talking about Seattle as the third or fourth best team in the NFC right now.
oh, no, because last year at this time, we were thinking that Geno Smith was, going to, last as a starter for 3 or 4 games as this team tanked its way into, being able to draft CJ Stroud. Um And that didn't happen. Instead, he came out and played extremely well. The offense came together well, and it's all of a sudden that this team is so much further along in its rebuild than we thought. Now they still need a
And
quarterback of the future because Geno's kind of old, but the offense came together. You got that player that you needed. You were able to go out and address your defense, and who would have thought that both rookie tackles would have, started almost every snap all season, and that both rookie corners were gonna turn out to be good last year, and you know what I mean? So it's like, at this point last year, we had lower expectations for the draft class than we should have, and did not believe in Geno Smith, and now we're in a position where we know that draft class was good. We look at this one, and it seems to be just as good, and you have a quarterback. When you have a quarterback, it just makes all the difference.
so what I'm hearing is, third, fourth ranked in the NFC. That gets us or in contention for an
Mhm.
NFC championship game, really,
Yeah.
is to go another step in the playoffs, win a game or two, and get yourself
Mhm.
into that NFC championship game where anything can happen. And
It's
that's
a
where
little
Seattle's at right now.
it's a little harder to do because the way you and I have them ranked, they are not first in their division, which means they're not gonna be playing playoff games at home, and
Yeah.
that makes life more of a challenge. Um, that's I mean, that's really what it comes down to, because my number 2 ranked team, and I believe your number 2 ranked team as well, is gonna be San Francisco.
It's true. Yeah. San Francisco, it's it's a tough deal. I mean, they got Javon Hargrave, which makes their defense even better. Like the best defense in the division. That's probably the second best defense overall. Certainly the best defensive line in the NFC, if not all of in the NFL. And they've got Christian McCaffrey, who's managed to stay healthy last year. George Kittle coming back. They had a decent draft. It wasn't great by any means, but they really didn't have a lot of draft capital. They did what they could. Jabbar Brown, the safety out of Penn State. They drafted a kicker. I like Darrell Luter, the cornerback out of South Alabama. I think he's underrated, and I think he'll come in right away and give them some snaps. But they could afford to lose a little bit, and they did. They lost Mike McGlinchey, the right tackle, who
Mhm.
got paid as the best right tackle in the NFL. Jimmy Garoppolo is no longer there.
They lost
Jimmy,
Emmanuel Mosey at cornerback.
yeah, Jimmy Ward at free safety. Those hurt, but Javon Hargrave, Isaiah Oliver comes in to start at corner. That kind of mitigates that. They had a roster that could afford to lose a little bit. They picked up a couple of key players, had a marginal draft. It's all about the quarterback for them. That's why I think Seattle does have a chance to
Mhm.
take the division.
Yeah, they do. I mean, for them, it comes down to that quarterback, this, thing. How healthy is Brock Purdy in his elbow? And, um, he was a guy without a tremendous arm before the injury, and but was really smart, got the ball out quick, really accurate, all the things that offense required of him. But if you lose a little bit of the arm because of the elbow injury, does that drop him into a range where he's no longer as effective? Um, is he even ready to play? Will he be there ready for the beginning of the season? We don't know. And if he's not, um, Trey Lance, is he? Are you getting anything from that? Do they try and trade him during the preseason and get something back for him? Uh, and then you got Sam Darnold.
Would you take a chance? Would you take a flyer on Trey Lance for our
If I was
team?
a if I was a team without a quarterback, if I was Washington, right?
What about a team like Seattle though, where Geno Smith is essentially on a 1 year deal potentially? It's a 2 year deal, but he could
I
get out
mean,
of it.
it depends um on what you got to give up. If you're going to throw a fifth round pick at him and get a guy that
I mean, he's
The
been
San
in the
Francisco's
offense.
clearly given up on, uh, I would go for it. Actually, if I was the Rams, that's the team that if I was them, I would go pursue because they've got, an old quarterback who's probably in his last year. Go get a young guy and see what you've got in him, especially since you don't have to give up much for him, and
All
he
right.
plays in the same offense. In Seattle, why not? I mean, you'd have to doing so would cost you, Drew Lock as your backup, when the season comes around, but I'm probably okay with that. As a chance to see if maybe this is a guy that you can, coach up and I mean, the talent's there. There's a reason why he was the 3rd overall pick in the draft. So, it's just a matter of getting him into the offense and playing time and all that. So, I'd do it. If I was a team without a quarterback, um, like I said, Washington comes to mind. Um, Man, I'd throw a mid-round pick at San Francisco to get a guy like Trey Lance. Why not?
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the top team in the NFC,
Yep,
Philadelphia Eagles. And there's
yep.
a reason they finished 14-3 last year. Um,
And
they've
they
got a chance this year.
destroyed the draft. Their draft was great.
Yeah, I love their draft. And, they lost some guys in free agency. We all knew that would happen. And they did. And they really didn't sign anybody. So they did lose a lot of talent. And they had a great draft. So they flipped their roster a little bit from an aging out roster to a very young roster at certain positions. And we'll see what happens with those losses. Javon Hargrave is a key example, defensive tackle.
Mhm.
Andre Dillard, the young tackle, they let go. Miles Sanders, the
He
running
he
back.
had lost he had lost his job is the reason why they let him go in Dillard. He was a guy that just never kinda developed into what they thought they were drafting. And so he had lost his job, he was no longer a starter, and they went ahead and, let him walk.
Okay. So, but Isaac Samalo, the guard, TJ Edwards, the linebacker, Marcus Epps, the safety, Kaiser White, the outside linebacker, all
That one's
starters.
gonna hurt.
Chauncey
Yep.
Gardner Johnson, Zach Pascal, Gardner Minshew, backup quarterback, moved on, but they signed Marcus Mariota. They did sign safety Terrell Edmonds to a minimal deal. But they knocked it out of the park with the draft, Keith. Jalen Carter, after
Oh,
dropping
yeah.
back, pick 9 overall. Nolan Smith, the edge, at 30th overall.
Super, super athletic, the guy's got safety speed and a linebacker body, and he's gonna be a special player, I really think so.
Yeah. Tyler
And that
Steen, offensive tackle, Sidney Brown, safety, Keely Ringo at corner, who really dropped in the draft because of the athletic testing, but still has some skills and size.
Mhm.
If he can get coached up, Tanner McGee, 188th overall, I thought is a great value at quarterback for them. And then Moro Ojomo, defensive tackle, picked 249 overall. I thought was one of the best values in the draft
Oh,
at
yeah,
that spot.
I'm just looking at him being available at that spot in the 7th round, and I'm still I'm still just confused at why he was still available. Him being available at that spot at 249 overall, it felt a lot like Poona Ford dropping. Um, when he did. And Poona Ford ended up going undrafted, and I had like a third or fourth round grade on him, and I was just shocked that he was still available there. And Moro Jones was very similar. I just could not see why he was still available when he was, but it turns out to be a great pick for them.
So, at the top of the NFC, you've got 4 teams, possibly 5 if you include Detroit, who have the ability to get to the NFC Championship game, Keith. Philadelphia, the 49ers, Seattle, Dallas, Detroit. Everything else, I think, is not in contention this year. I could be wrong, but that's the way I'm seeing it. I think
would agree.
Seattle and Detroit are very interesting teams that are almost even. It'll be a fascinating look at 2 teams on the uprise that are going to be there for the next 3 or 4 seasons in Seattle and Detroit. When teams like the Eagles and the 49ers diminish, those teams will be ready to sit at the top. But one of those teams could surprise. They're both very well coached. We all know Pete Carroll is going to get his teams ready to go. Seattle could be in the conversation, I think, Keith, sneakily, in the Super Bowl conversation. I didn't think that it could happen. We had a great offseason, though. I thought we were still a year away, and we could very well be, but it doesn't mean that we're not in the conversation.
I think Seattle, because of the youth, they need a year of getting these rookies a chance to play, to continue to clear out, salary cap, some dead money, and getting them in a position where they can have a deeper roster overall. I think a year away is right, but they're going to be knocking on the door. And if San Francisco falters at all, and Seattle can jump up in win that division, now that you're playing your playoff games at home, yeah, they could definitely get there. I mean, you just have to get past Philly, and that's going to be the hard part. But
on any given Sunday,
yep, and you're going to get close. So, then Seattle could possibly, win the right to go get blown out in the Super Bowl. Or maybe not, but I'm just the AFC
Who knows?
The AFC is just so much better than the NFC right now.
Yeah, it would be kind of a fun show to. Yeah,
those 5 teams, right, that you mentioned: Philadelphia, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, Detroit. How many of them are in the top 10 in the AFC? I've got
4.
2.
4 of them.
Philadelphia and San Francisco.
Seattle, and Dallas.
I don't think Seattle
and Detroit's knocking on the door.
10.
Yes.
I don't think they make the top 10.
Oh, come on.
In the AFC?
Dallas is 12-5. In the NFL last year, yes, I do.
Playing in a terrible division.
Now the question is, that's where it cuts off for me. There's not another team in the NFC right now that would make the top 15 in the AFC. There's not another team that would make the playoffs in the AFC out of those 4 or 5 teams there.
Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, the Chargers, the Jets, the Dolphins, right? I mean, the AFC
the Ravens
is stacked. I didn't say the Ravens.
Cleveland Browns. Right. The Chargers. I don't know if you mentioned the Chargers.
I said the Chargers.
People are talking about the Denver Broncos coming back this year if Russell Wilson has a great year, and it's a better coach team, obviously. And,
they fixed their coaching debacle, and if they can get,
you just mentioned 10, 12 teams.
Yeah, that's the thing is, and I would put Philadelphia and San Francisco within that top 10.
Yes, but I would put Seattle in there as well. Probably Dallas, and I don't think I would get any pushback from that from most people. Dallas is there. I think Seattle's there.
I don't know.
In fact, people would argue that Dallas deserves to be ahead of Seattle every day and twice on Tuesdays because of they proved it last year. They were 12-5. Seattle still is a 9-win team. We'll see. Some people have Seattle losing more this year. I don't think so. I think if you follow the team, follow the NFL, Seattle's clearly in that conversation. I think Seattle's in that conversation in the AFC in the AFC as well. If Seattle and Dallas were in the AFC, those would be top 10 teams, regardless. I think they're top 10 teams in the NFL overall. If you had a ranking, some people have Seattle at 10, some people have them at 12, but usually, in the NFL overall rankings, Seattle isn't any less than 12. Dallas is usually up in the top 8 in that conversation. So I disagree with you.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's
I think
close. I mean, the AFC is clearly head and shoulders above the NFC. There's no question. I think there's 4 teams that would be in the top 10 in the AFC out of the NFC.
see. I don't think that Dallas would be in there, and I think Seattle would be just on the outside looking in at 11. Because I
Yeah.
look at it and you go, okay, in the top out of the top 5 teams, there's only one team in the
You
from the
know what
NFC.
we need to do is we need to have a show that's AFC.
Yeah, we need to do the AFC show.
We have to, because then we can have this conversation properly. And maybe we have a combined show where we do NFC and AFC, just kind of for this reason alone, is to find out where this conference is, because I agree with you overall in that the NFC is just a tremendously weaker conference right now, just based on quarterbacks and roster depth. The AFC is just, it used to be the NFC. And then this last 3 or 4 years, it's completely flipped over.
Yeah, quarterbacks keep moving, over and other star players, and it's just been a lot of regression by some formerly really good
Yeah.
NFC teams like the Rams.
Green Bay, yeah,
Mhm.
etc. Right.
Should be noted that neither one of us had Green Bay in our top 10.
Noted. Yes. Yeah. I actually worked hard to make sure that didn't happen for me. They could have, you could have put Green Bay in as high as 8 and taken, for me, New Orleans Saints and moved them out, or Carolina, for example, or Washington. I think that those 3 teams and Green Bay are similar, but Green Bay lost Aaron Rodgers, and without Aaron Rodgers, I don't believe Green Bay has any chance at all in being better than Detroit or Minnesota in that division. And they're out of the playoffs. And to me, they're a 6-7 win team max.
Yeah.
All right. Fun show. I love the look around, just to kind of see where Seattle's at in this conversation. And I'm a little higher on Seattle right now at this point in the offseason in June than you are. My job is to bring you up slightly. So by September, you've got Seattle as the third best team, or the second best team in the NFC.
Second best team in the NFC above San Francisco.
Possibly. We'll see who the quarterback is on September 1st for San Francisco, and you might change.
San Francisco, that roster is really good, but the quarterback situation is just unpleasant.
It could cost them
currently.
games. Going into the season without a quarterback, a proven quarterback on that roster would just be a crime. And if it happens that Sam Darnold is the quarterback, that team is minus 2 or 3 wins from last year, and they were at 12. I think they could be a 9-win team if they didn't have the quarterback situation, and that gives Seattle a real opportunity to move up.
With that roster.
You just can't put any quarterback in there and expect them to be successful. Now, Kyle Shanahan, yes, he can work miracles, but come on.
I mean, he took Mr. Irrelevant, stuck him in there, and made them look like a Super Bowl contender.
True.
So,
true.
I mean, we'll see. Shanahan is one hell of a coach. So, they've got that going for him.
True. All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. Show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and our own YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, share it, leave great comments and reviews. That would be wonderful. And we'll see you next time. Take care. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.